I always found when in any discussion on war, inevitably, in any discussion on war, at a certain point in the discussion, somebody would say, oh, well, it's human nature. Well, first of all, from my own experience, and I still have to tell this to people because there are still people who talk about the desire of young men to go to war, the thrill it is for young men to be in war, to shoot their guns, to kill. And I thought about my own experience in the Air Force, and it was very clear to me, looking around at all these guys around me who were dropping bombs and who were killing people. It did not come from inside. It did not come from, oh, God, how good it would be to kill some people today. There was no urge to kill, even though they were the enemy. No. What it came from was simply we had been trained. And also we had been told it's a good war. We had been told we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. It'll be bad if they won. It'll be good if we win. We've got to drop the bombs. And so we'll do it, and we'll do it as well as we can. But there was no spontaneous urge to kill. So that was my own my own personal experience. Simply recoiled at the idea that soldiers have this kind of killing instinct, or the young men have this killing instinct. And then when I got away from my own experiences and just began to study history and history of wars, something else became clear to me. And that is, wars don't take place out of the rush of a population demanding war. It isn't the population that demands war, it's the leaders who demand war and who prepare the population for war. I mean, it's World War I. I mean, you didn't have the American people clamoring for the United States to go to war. Not at all. In fact, if anything, it was the opposite. People did not want to go to war. That's why Woodrow Wilson, when he was campaigning in 1916, the war in Europe was on, and the question was, will the United States get into it? And Wilson, campaigning in 1916, and knowing that this would be a popular thing to say, said no. We are not going to go to war. Then he's elected, and then almost immediately he calls upon the nation to go to war. But the nation doesn't respond immediately. If there was a spontaneous urge to kill, why would we need a draft? We would just take advantage of the natural desire of people to kill and give them an opportunity. But no, you have to draft people. Well, you have to do two things, really, in order to mobilize an army for war. You have to persuade them that this is a good thing to do, a noble thing to do. And you have to work very hard to persuade them, because after all, they're going to risk their lives. And so in World War I, a massive propaganda campaign was mounted by the Wilson administration. They hired the number one sort of public relations person in the country to organize, 75,000 speakers to go around the country to give speeches everywhere in the country. And the war spirit was built up, and the atrocity stories, the Huns, the Kaiser, really inflaming the public. Only then, was it possible to really mobilize the nation for war. So you have, on the one hand, you have the propaganda campaign, and then on the other hand, you have the coercion, the draft, and the punishments. If you're neither seduced by the propaganda nor compelled to go by the draft, and if you resist, you will go to jail. So it takes, in other words, powerful inducements and threats to mobilize the young population of a nation for war. And if you had a spontaneous urge for war, you wouldn't have to do that. And in fact, there's no scientific evidence. I mean, when I got interested in the question of human nature, I would sort of look at the work of anthropologists and zoologists, and I would read, Conrad Lorenz on aggression, and who was, a zoologist, and I would read the work of anthropologists who had studied different groups of people, primitive tribes, as we call them, and it was clear to me from looking at the works of anthropologists, there were some tribes that were fierce and some tribes that were peaceful. It clearly wasn't a universal quality. It depended on the conditions under which they lived. And this guy, Colin Turnbull, wrote books about the forest people and the mountain people. And the forest people, the pygmies in the forest, lived under the kind of conditions which made them violent. The people in the mountains were living under different kinds of conditions, and they were peaceful. So, I just didn't see any scientific evidence. And even when, somebody would, refer me to the work of a scientist like E.O. Wilson, Edward Wilson at Harvard, who wrote a book about sociobiology, and then he wrote a book on human nature. And you say, well, look, here's a very smart scientist, and he believes in the instinct for aggression. And so I read his book, E.O. Wilson's book, and when I read it, it was very clear to me that no, that's not quite true. That Wilson, even though he talks about a propensity for aggression, says the environment determines whether any kind of propensity that you have is acted out. And also the word aggression is a very ambiguous term because you can take out your aggressions in many ways. You don't have to take it out by killing people. And all subject to environmental circumstances. So to me, what was clear was that there was a very, very important political consequence of this belief in human nature as the basis for war and violence. Because the consequence of believing that wars come as a result of human nature is to place the blame for wars on individual people, on the citizenry, and to take away the blame from the leaders of the nation who are driving the country into war.
Which is probably why they use the term human nature.
That's right. That's right. So it then became very important for me to knock down, argue against that idea whenever I could. Because it's an idea so deeply ingrained in people, because it's of course, has this insidious effect of turning their attention away from the policymakers towards themselves. It's like telling the poor that you're poor because of your own faults and not because you live in a society in which the wealth is distributed very